Hey everyone! You guys made it despite the rain and
The deluge.
torrential heat and whatever else is happening outside right now. Thank you.
Only a little bit of global climate change.
Really excited to welcome you. Thank you for being here, Senator, and thank you for all of you. We have a really, really great audience with lots of really thoughtful questions focused on substance, so we want to just jump right in and say thank you and welcome to you for being here.
Thank you.
So let's start with a few questions about news of the day. First of all, you've condemned President Trump's attacks on the squad, but at his rally last week, it was his supporters who broke out in chants of send her back, and Trump's poll numbers actually went up amongst Republicans after those attacks. Since you say you're the best candidate to win back red and purple America, what can you say to those voters who are turned off by the extreme rhetoric of the progressive women in your own party, particularly as it pertains to Israel?
So my perspective on President Trump is really simple. I think his attacks on these four women is racist. I think it's misogynistic, and I think it's morally wrong. And what I would say to his supporters is exactly that. That why would you think dividing America on racial lines, on religious lines, on socioeconomic lines could possibly strengthen our country? And why would you think that attacking women members of Congress, who all they want to do is serve their constituents, to lift up voices that aren't being heard, and to solve problems is consistent with who we are as Americans? So I would just stand up to President Trump and tell them that he's leading America in the wrong direction. But I also remind America that in our strongest moments as a country, it's when we've treated others the way we want to be treated, when we've cared about the least among us, when we actually love one another. And the worst thing that President Trump has done is really divide us and made us a smaller country. And so I would just remind this country what made the country as great as it is. It's our diversity that is our strength. It's the fact that we are a country that in our best moments creates more rights for more people, whether it's suffrage, whether it's civil rights, whether it's LGBTQ equality. Those are our strongest moments in our history. And I would try to bring them along with us, because the truth is our future is about lifting up every voice, not demonizing the vulnerable, not pushing people down, but lifting us all up so the whole country can grow.
I want to follow up on this. I was struck when Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley was interviewed about Trump's attacks. And she said she was in a place of privilege to receive this kind of media attention, whereas everyday examples of racism often go unnoticed. I was struck by that. And I wondered, as a white woman running for president, what's your reaction when you hear that?
Well, Ayanna is an extraordinary role model for so many women. She's a woman of color who won in a district against an incumbent, speaking her values and speaking what she believes in. But as a woman who is white, I have extraordinary privilege because of the color of my skin, but also by the fact that I am a U.S. Senator, the fact that I'm running for President of the United States. And so my job as the senator from New York is to lift up voices that aren't necessarily being listened to and voices that aren't necessarily being heard. And it is not the responsibility of black women in America or brown women in America to fight these fights alone. It's my responsibility to fight with them, to lift up their voices, and that I not only recognize and understand that it's my responsibility, but that as a candidate for president, it's my responsibility and mandate to make sure that all these voices are being heard. It's why I have a very comprehensive approach for how I will tackle institutional racism and systemic racism in society, whether it's happening in our healthcare system with maternity mortality rates higher than any other industrialized country and 4 times higher for black women, or whether I'm taking on our educational disparities or taking on our issues in the economy or taking on issues of criminal justice. And so I will continue to fight for all Americans, regardless of who they are or where they're from or who they love, but actually having direct and aggressive responses to institutional and systemic racism every day.
We're going to turn to the audience in just a moment. I want to ask one other news of the day question. Robert Muller is set to testify in Congress on Wednesday. You've already come out and called for impeachment, and your party seems to be trending in that direction. Given that Mueller is unlikely to really say much new that's not in the report, is this really the issue your party should be continuing to put front and center?
So I think the fact that Mueller's testifying is fantastic, because the truth is his report was deeply damning. He outlined allegations and credible evidence of obstruction of justice. that President Trump, through many means, tried to obstruct justice in this country. And so I think taking his testimony through the House of Representatives is the appropriate next step. I believe that we should begin those impeachment hearings because it's the only way we'll get testimony from Barr. It's the only way we're going to get testimony from other witnesses that we want, like, for example, Mr. McGahn. So we must actually begin these kinds of hearings so that we can have a greater authority under law to get the facts. The American people have a right to see the unredacted Mueller report. They have a right to hear the testimony from people that are cited in that report. And what we've seen from President Trump is every step of the way, he's blocking access to information. He continues to obstruct justice by making it impossible to hear testimony from McGahn and from Barr. And so I'm grateful that Mueller's testifying this week, and I'm grateful that we have leadership in the House that is really pushing forward on being able to get the facts for the American people. The American people have a right to know.
Thank you, Senator. Let's turn to our first audience question from Kaylee Scales.
Hi there. How are you? I heard you speak a little bit about addressing racial injustice, and I represent Black Lives Matter Global Network, and I just wanted to ask you a specific question just following on that point. Traditionally, Black voters have been the Democratic Party's most loyal constituency. According to The Economist, since 1962, no Democratic presidential candidate has captured less than 80% of the Black vote. Specifically, how do you plan to prioritize communication with Black folks to ensure the impact of our vote is earned? Also, if elected president, how will you specifically address some of the racial injustice issues that you mentioned, like the education system, our workforce, housing, and the criminal justice system?
Thank you for your question. So the way I will address it is going directly to Black voters in their communities and talking directly to them about the issues they care about, listening to their concerns, absorbing their fears, their worries, their anxieties, and taking them on as my own cause, regardless of what they are and regardless what the solutions are. Because that's what you need. You need someone who will fight as hard as they would fight for their own children, whether or not they experience these racial injustices every day. And so I see this. I see this when I travel with a Black staffer, and I see how she's treated differently. When we walk into a hotel, how people talk to her, how she's dismissed, how she's not listened to. I see it when I'm having dinner with friends who are African American and Black, and how the waiter doesn't even hear their orders. They bring them the wrong food. It's these daily injustices that are really quite shocking for me to see as a woman of extraordinary privilege. But institutional racism and systemic injustice is so pervasive, you have to do multilateral, multi-dimensional efforts. So in the economy, I can tell you when I was in Ohio and met with a Black-owned business, it was a grandfather, who started a tire and car fixing business. And he got a loan, one loan, probably 50 years ago, ensured that he could not only start his business, but he could have generational wealth for him, his children, and his grandchildren. And so I would use my SBA specifically to help businesses of color, Black businesses, get access to capital when they need it so they can not only create a business and thrive, but accrue real wealth. Because the wealth gap between Black and white Americans is real, and it's growing. It's because of hundreds of years of institutional racism. Over and over again, these repeated injustices holding whole communities behind. I would also have basic postal banking. 30% of America is unbanked or underbanked, and a lot of it has to do with communities of color. And so if you used every post office in America to offer basic banking to people who don't have resources, they could have a checking account, they could have a savings account, they could get a mortgage, they could get a business loan, and it would be available to them so they could, again, accrue wealth. I think the baby bonds idea is an excellent idea. So you have to begin to attack these issues directly. In the healthcare system, maternal mortality. Maternal mortality exists because doctors and nurses throughout our healthcare system don't believe women when they say something's not right. They don't listen to your words. And if you're a Black woman, you are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. So I have a comprehensive bill to actually say, you need to have better training in our hospitals. You need to have a set of equipment in every delivery room. So if a woman's about to bleed out, if a woman is suffering because of her delivery, that you can meet her emergency need accurately and effectively. It works. I also want to deal with criminal justice problems. The fact that we have cash bail, the fact that so many black and brown Americans don't have access to $500 to pay bail so they don't have to be incarcerated. If you're incarcerated, you can't show up to work the next day. You're going to lose your job. You might lose custody of your child. There's so many impacts because of that lack of money. So I will abolish cash bail, but I'll also decriminalize and deschedule and legalize marijuana. And I will make sure when that business is created, it's not one that's overwhelmingly benefiting Wall Street. Let's make sure that communities of color have access to all lines of business, whether they are growers, whether they are providers, whether they are distributors, and make sure that the resources that come from that industry actually get poured back in to black and brown communities that have been disproportionately harmed because of the criminal justice system. So those are just a couple of ideas of what I will do as president to directly attack institutional racism, the wealth gap, and bias in society.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to pick up on some of that in just a moment, but for now, I want to switch to immigration. We have another audience question from Elias Rosenfeld.
Hello. My name is Elias Rosenfeld, and I'm a senior at Brandeis University in Boston. I became undocumented after my mom passed away from kidney cancer when I was only 12 years old. And her death meant that I fell out of status in our nation's broken legal immigration system. Fortunately, in 2012, I was granted DACA by President Obama and provided protections from my worst fear, deportation. However, as you know, President Trump revoked the DACA program in 2017, putting my life and that of 800,000 others in imminent risk. In detail, can you please explain what you will do in your first 100 days as president to provide a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients, dreamers, and the at-large immigrant community?
Well, thank you for your question, and I'm sorry you've had this extraordinary burden, and I'm sorry we have a president who continually degrades, demeans, and devalues our immigrants, our DACA kids, our dreamers, and I will fight against every aspect of his racism that he's spewed into this country. I visited the facilities in Texas. I've seen how he's treating migrants who are desperate for access to asylum, who are desperate for just any bit of humanity and hope. So I'll do a couple of things very differently. First, I will pass comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. We had a good bipartisan bill in the Senate. We could pass it in this Democratic House. And it creates a 10-year pathway where people actually pay taxes, pay into Social Security, pay into local taxes and property taxes. And if they do everything right over a decade, they become citizens. That is a pathway to citizenship. Second, I will treat asylum seekers very different at the border. I have no problem funding border security, anti-terrorism, anti-gun trafficking, anti-human trafficking, anti-drug trafficking. And I'd fully fund that, unlike President Trump. But I would treat asylum seekers very differently. I would give them lawyers when they come to this country seeking asylum. I'd make sure there was a community-based system to take those families in, to treat them with the humanity they deserve. And third, I would make sure I invest in the countries where communities are streaming out of because there's so much violence, so much gang violence, so much civil war, so much poverty. We spend a lot of money in this country abroad to make sure we have stability. Why not make sure we invest in places like El Salvador and Guatemala to make sure these families aren't streaming out because of absolute desperation? I would call on the world community to help, to actually handle this crisis together with our allies across the globe. There's no reason why we shouldn't. America used to be the beacon of light and hope in the world. The Statue of Liberty used to stand for something. Send us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Just not under this president. And we will restore what's been lost, and we will make sure that you have a pathway to citizenship.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I want to press you on this for one moment, Senator. You've been criticized for flip-flopping on a number of key issues, and you've even come out and apologized for previous stances you had on this issue as well as others like guns. I wanted to ask you, is the immigration issue the one that you feel most wrong about, that you most regret?
Well, what I've said is 10 years ago when I became senator of New York State, I recognized that some of the positions I had as a House member at upstate New York weren't good enough. And if I had been a wiser, more thoughtful person, I would have been for the things that I'm for now. But I've led on these issues for a decade. I've led on comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. I've led on ending gun violence, ending the trafficking of weapons, ending and banning assault weapons, and making sure we have universal background checks. So my question really is to all the commentators, because they keep asking this, is would you rather have a president like President Trump, who would never admit he's wrong, who would never say that he needed to change his position because he listened to a constituent, because of his narcissism, because he's so self-centered, because he's so arrogant? Or would you rather have someone who is thoughtful enough to have the humility to recognize when they're wrong, to have the wisdom to listen to their constituents, learn from them, and then have the courage to lead from a very different place? That is who I am, and I think this country would be so better off if we had a president who had that.
Thank you. Let's shift gears. I want to turn to another question from the audience, and this one is from Amanda Wynn. Hey, Amanda.
Hi, my name is Amanda Wynn. I'm a rape survivor. And so, Senator, I want to talk a little bit about your track record in working on this issue. You've attempted to pass legislation addressing sexual assault survivor rights, like the Military Justice Improvement Act, but this act hasn't passed. So my question is, if you're elected president, will you work with Congress in a bipartisan manner, or will you take executive action on this issue?
Executive action on the first day? Yeah, it's not a question. This has been something I was very disappointed in the last administration, because sexual violence in the military is a scourge that every Secretary of Defense has said in the past 25 years, since Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense, that they have zero tolerance for sexual assault. But last year alone, there were more than 20,000 incidents of sexual assault and sexual violence against women and men. And what we know is that the actual prosecution rate is going down, and the conviction rate is going down. And the retaliation rate for the brave women and men who come forward is still set at 59%. And so as Commander-in-Chief, I would take the decision-making of whether a crime has been committed out of the chain of command and give it directly to a trained military prosecutor. That will create professionalism within the system, and as survivors have told us over and over again, it will overwhelmingly change whether they report that a crime's been committed, depending on who gets to decide whether to prosecute. They don't believe the chain of command has their back. 66% of sexual harassment comes from someone above you in the chain of command. And so they know the climate that's been created is based on that chain of command. They don't have any faith that commanders 1 or 2 or 3 rungs up are going to have their back. And so they don't report. So yes, I will change the rule on the first day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's stay on a similar topic. I want to ask you about a report that was released just today by Jane Mayer in The New Yorker about former Senator Al Franken. You were the leader of the movement against him, one of the leaders of the movement against him, but Mayer's reporting raises serious doubts over the credibility of the allegations against Franken. 7 sitting and retired senators are now on record saying that they regret what they did. So based on this new reporting, do you have any regrets whatsoever about the position you've taken?
So I disagree with your reading of that article. Did you read the whole thing?
I read the whole thing.
Okay, so point 1, it only talked about one allegation. It talked about the first one. What about the 7 other allegations? There was really no critical or investigative journalism or reporting on the other 7. And that certainly causes me pause. Second, he had 8 credible allegations against him, 2 since he was senator, and the 8th one happened to be a congressional staffer. Now, I could have told those 7 senators and any of the senators, the 35 senators who came out against him, that there is no prize for someone who tries to hold accountable a powerful man who is good at his day job. But we should have the courage to do it anyway. So no, I do not have any regrets.
Well, based on the report, I did read the... Thank you. I did read the full report. I mean, based on the reporting, if the reporting bears true, and there are many people who, there's a petition, I believe, with 75,000 people on change.org for him to run again for office. If the reporting bears true and he were to decide to run again, would you support him in that effort?
So when you say the reporting rings true. They only reported on one allegation. There was no reporting on the 7 others. After the first allegation, did anyone call for him to resign? No. It wasn't until the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. That is when 45 senators, or whatever the number was, called on him to resign. It was 8 allegations, credible allegations, documented in real time at the time they were committed and corroborated by investigative journalists. So, 8 allegations. Listen, Al Franken had every right to do whatever he wanted. If he wanted to wait for his ethics committee investigation, that's his decision. If he wanted to wait for his next election, his decision. My only decision was whether or not I chose to remain silent. My decision is whether or not I chose to carry his water and defend him with my silence. I am a mother of boys. I needed to have clarity, one, because as a senator who has led these movements, both to end sexual violence in the military, end sexual violence on college campus, led and passed a unanimous bill to change how we deal with sexual harassment in Congress, I did not want to remain silent. I wanted to stand by those 8 women. And as a mother of sons, when I'm having conversations at home with Theo, who's 15, and he says, Mom, why are you so tough on Al Franken? I needed to have a little bit of clarity and say, Theo, it's not okay to grope a woman anywhere on her body without her consent. It is not okay to forcibly kiss a woman ever without her consent. It is not okay for Senator Franken, and it is not okay for you. So the truth is, yes, I would stand by those 8 women today because they have a right to be heard. They have a right to tell their truth, especially if they are not being believed or ignored or listened to, and if the person they're speaking out against is a powerful man. So my job is to lift up voices of those who aren't being heard and to demand at least some measure of accountability. But the decision of whether to wait for his investigation through the ethics committee, his alone, no one else's. So blaming a woman for the actions of a man, I don't know. I don't believe in it, and I don't think it's right.
Thank you. One more question before we switch gears to a different topic. I wanted to ask you, and this is one of the most common questions we got from our audience as we prepared for this. Are there ways you've had to change your approach running for president as both a woman and a mom that men wouldn't have to experience? And are there certain societal expectations?
Answering questions about Al Franken? Are you kidding me? Like, honestly, are you kidding me?
Well, lots of
Have
senators,
they asked
lots
the
of
men
senators were asked
senators?
about him. Lots of
Oh,
senators.
really? Were you there? No.
But
In
by
fact,
Jane Mayer,
it
Jane
was,
Mayer in the New Yorker, she was one of the leading reporters.
of course,
She is one of
but
the
let me
leading
ask you, how many senators were asked, should Al Franken resign? Should Al Franken resign? Every day for 2 straight weeks. It was the women senators who were asked every day, multiple times a day. Were the male colleagues asked? Absolutely not. So let's be clear. There is absolutely a double standard. Women are asked to hold accountable their colleagues. The men are not. Who is being held accountable for Al Franken's decision to resign? Women senators, including me. It's outrageous. It's absurd. And if this party expects to beat President Trump without valuing the voices of women, without valuing the reality and the truths of women, the answer is no. Because if you don't value women, who's going to turn out to vote for you? Who's going to organize for you? Who do you think won the 2018 election cycle? It was women running in red and purple places across this country. It was extraordinary women like Lucy McBath and Lauren Underhill who ran and won and made an extraordinary difference. These women are the ones who broke through because they ran in the purple and red places. People like Kirsten Sinema, people like Gretchen Whitmer, winning statewide on issues of conviction. So if this party thinks by not valuing women, they're going to beat Trump, well, they're wrong. Because if you don't value women, they will not turn out for you and you will not win the next election. I promise you.
Thank you. So it's time for another question from our audience, and this one is from Araceli Jimenez Hudes.
It's Araceli with a rolled R.
Araceli, I'm sorry about
Yeah,
that.
that was better. Cool. Hi, Senator Gillibrand. My name is Adeseli. I'm a full-time organizer with the Sunrise Movement. So for context, for the folks watching, as I'm sure you already know, Senator, the world's top scientists have told us that we have just 11 years to stop the climate crisis. And I was so excited when you came out as an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal resolution in Congress. And I'm wondering if you'll take that moral clarity and that conviction with you to the Oval Office. And I want to ask if you'll pledge to make the Green New Deal a day one priority if you're elected president.
It is. After I Clorox the Oval Office, I will then restore our moral leadership on the world stage. And one of the first things I will do is not only re-engage on the global climate accords, but begin to lead a worldwide discussion about how we will tackle global climate change. Because the truth is, global climate change is the greatest threat to humanity of today. And if you have a threat that's that significant, you need a solution that's even more significant. You need a solution that is so broad-based and so comprehensive that it's relevant to everything you discuss as president. So it is the cornerstone of my administration. And I will do a couple of things very differently. First of all, pass the Green New Deal. It's not that hard. It's a bunch of common sense bipartisan ideas that, frankly, I've been working on and passing for a decade. Things like infrastructure. Every state in this country needs new mass transit, a new electric grid. They need new roads, bridges, sewers, and they need rural broadband. So that's bipartisan. Second, they need clean air and clean water. There's not a state that doesn't have pollution somewhere, whether it's Iowa where they have nitrates, or New Hampshire where they have PFOA and PFAS, or Michigan where they're still worried about lead. Those are realities that every state wants to deal with, so invest in clean air and clean water. And last, green jobs. Every young kid in America wants access to STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, math. Every parent wants to make sure their kid can get the training they need for these jobs of the future. 8 of 9 of the fastest growing industries require proficiency in STEM. So we know that if you offer it for our grade school and high school kids, they can actually be better prepared for the future. So invest in these things, put a price on carbon, drive investment towards renewables and efficiency and entrepreneurs and innovators who are solving the problem, and tax polluters because they're actually contributing to global climate change as well as poor health. So you can do this. It's not that hard. And then when you're negotiating trade agreements, or you're negotiating on the world stage, make how these countries respond to global climate change part of your discussions. Make sure every country in the world wants to tackle this. And instead of starting a space race with Russia, how about a green energy race with China? How about creating a worldwide competition to whose engineers and scientists and mathematicians are the greatest? Whose country is and their inventors and entrepreneurs are going to solve the problem. When John F. Kennedy said, I want to put a man on the moon in 10 years, he had no clue if he could do it. He just knew it was a great organizing principle. He knew it was the thing that every kid would want to become an astronaut and every engineer would want to be part of NASA. Do the same thing. That's what a president can do. You can use the bully pulpit to drive innovation and drive competition. And as president, that's exactly what I would do.
Thank you, Senator.
So, Senator. Yeah. So, Senator, if President Obama had health care, or President Trump, his top priority is immigration, is this the signature issue of the Gillibrand presidency, or otherwise put, the one issue you'd go to the mat for and stake your presidency on?
So, yes, it definitely is that signature issue, but there's another issue that has to be part of it, because I don't know that I can get it all done if I don't deal with this one problem. So the biggest problem in Washington is the greed and corruption and the rot at the heart of Washington. It's the money in politics. If you don't take on money in politics, then you can't actually overcome the power of the fossil fuel industry or of the polluters. Because the way the revolving door of Washington works is somebody's a member of Congress, and all of a sudden they're a lobbyist, all of a sudden they work at the EPA, and they write the laws to make sure that the polluters continue to pollute, and the fossil fuel providers continue to have enormous influence on Congress. So I think the necessary first step for all of this is actually having publicly funded elections. actually driving a campaign against money in politics, trying to put the power of this democracy back in the hands of voters by saying, let's have as much power in the hands of the Parkland kids as the NRA. Let's have as much power in your hands as the Koch brothers. Because until we do that, you will not get any of these things done. You won't see health care as a right unless you're willing to take on the insurance industry. You won't see ending the opioid crisis or lowering prescription drug prices if you don't take on the drug companies. And you won't see passing a Green New Deal until you directly take on the fossil fuel manufacturers and the polluters. And so the quickest way to reduce their power in our system is have publicly funded elections and restore our democracy into the hands of the people.
Thank you. It's time for another audience question, and this one is from Aditi Juneja.
A 2018 survey found that over half of all Americans believe the United States is in real danger of becoming a non-democratic, authoritarian country. What are the things you would do in your first year to restore the idea that nobody is above the law and fortify our institutions to prevent democratic erosion? For example, would you support comprehensive legislation to prevent abuses of presidential power?
I certainly would. And what President Trump has done is he's really attacked our institutions. He's attacked the independence of the judiciary. And I would actually try to depoliticize the judiciary, and I'd look at all solutions in that regard, whether that means appointing more justices to the Supreme Court, or whether that means judicial term limits, or passing transformative ethics regulations for the judiciary. Did you know that the judiciary, they can be wined and dined by lobbyists any day of the week? Did you know that judicial appointees and justices can be taken on junkets by every special interest in America? No joke. So we need to shore up the judiciary. We need to also make sure we have a strong press. It means making sure we have whistleblower protections. It means to make sure that we can have a free and fair press no matter what. He's taken on the freedom of religion with his Muslim ban. I'd undo that on the first day. And I'd really talk about how we guarantee a separation of church and state. So I would take on the institutions of our democracy and strengthen them. And more than anything, I would also strengthen our voting rights. Not only did Russia try to infiltrate and undermine our elections, as documented very effectively by Muller, but we have Republican legislatures across the country trying to take away people's right to vote through the census, trying to have an immigration question to make sure people don't answer the census, or whether they're directly going after voters by having ID laws, by having different types of discrimination in local voting laws. So I have a comprehensive approach to voting rights, making Election Day a day off, guaranteeing early voting, guaranteeing vote by mail, making sure that we have a paper receipt for every ballot, as just a few examples. So yes, I will do what it takes to guarantee our democracy is whole. And the last piece is really getting the money out of politics and actually having publicly funded elections like they have in Seattle. It actually worked. The type of people who participated changed dramatically. More women, more minorities, more low-income people actually participated in that democracy because of publicly funded elections.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Senator, I'm going to switch gears. I've yet to hear you talk about what you would do as president as it pertains to Facebook and the big tech companies. We've all heard Elizabeth Warren call for Facebook and Google to be broken up. Is that position too extreme, and do you think that Facebook has been a net positive or a net negative for the world?
Negative.
Okay.
I don't think Elizabeth Warren's wrong on that. We need to investigate the social media platforms to see if they are engaging in antitrust practices. We need to see if they're engaging in anti-competitive practices. And I don't think that our antitrust laws are actually up to date enough to accommodate the realities of social media platforms. They weren't designed for what the economy of today looks like. So I would direct my Department of Justice and have a thoughtful approach towards what should we be doing for social media, how should we regulate, how should we create oversight and accountability, and if they need to be broken up, then we should break them up. So I would do the work to assess whether that is necessary.
But you're not there yet.
No, I'm there. But I'd investigate it because I practiced antitrust law. We need to actually see whether our antitrust laws are sufficient to prosecute these companies for different kinds of behavior, creating vertical and horizontal integration. And if they're doing it in a way that's anti-competitive, that needs a full, thorough Department of Justice investigation to determine whether or not they're engaging in antitrust behavior, and also to determine whether our laws need to be updated. So I would do that. Second, I think people feel deeply uncomfortable how much of our data and how much of our personal information is being used by social media platforms without our consent. So I would try to change our laws to make sure that we have consent to who's taking our information and using it for profit. And that, again, needs a whole set of laws being passed and a whole set of regulations to accommodate the realities of today. And I would also have a cabinet level position whose job was to actually govern and regulate how we deal with cyber overall. Because we have different silos of cyber response. We've got the military that does cyber warfare and cyber defense. We have cyber crime through our DOJ. We have cybersecurity in different parts of our government, but we don't actually have a cabinet level position whose goal and role it is to provide expertise and recommendations with regard to how we deal with this part of our economy, which is growing more and more significant every day.
And just on Facebook, because you said it's a net negative, as you think about why you said that so quickly, I mean, is it the fake news issue? Is it the fact that the company is too big? Is it, because many people use Facebook every day too.
Yes.
Many people use Facebook every day to organize and mobilize. And how do you weigh those?
So I think the biggest mistake that Facebook made was allowing their platform to be used to destroy and undermine our democracy. And I think that is a really big problem. I think the fact that people were allowed to buy Facebook ads in rubles was a bit of a red flag that I think is unconscionable that they, number one, didn't catch, and number two, didn't prevent. I think it's outrageous that Russians were able to use social media platforms created in this country to undermine our democracy, to divide this country, to spread fake news, and to spread division and hate. They're trying to tear apart our whole country. Make no mistake, they're doing this very purposefully. And the fact that Facebook was more concerned with their profits than the American people, I think is shameful.
Thank you. Let's turn to our audience for another question from Dante Berry.
Good evening, Senator. How are you doing? I believe in a world where we don't have to compete for basic needs and human rights like water, clean air, housing, jobs, and healthcare, and that we should have and feel safe from gun violence, including police shootings. Why don't you think socialism would work for a country where young people and the rising majority are overwhelmingly in support of social programs?
So I support social programs, but I don't think there's an example in all the world where socialism actually worked, because socialism is just as easily corrupted as capitalism. So what we know works in America is healthy capitalism. What doesn't work in America is corrupted capitalism. Corrupted capitalism is the definition of greed. And there's no better example of that than the NRA. The lowest moment in my entire Senate career was during the votes after Sandy Hook that our Congress was unwilling to pass any common sense gun reform. They couldn't pass universal background checks. They couldn't pass an anti-federal trafficking law, and they couldn't ban assault weapons and large magazines. It literally broke my heart. And the reason they couldn't is because so many members of Congress are beholden to the NRA and the greed and corruption of the gun manufacturers. And that's why I want to get money out of politics, because that corruption is based on the money fed into campaigns nationwide, campaign after campaign. And so you really do need publicly funded elections if you want to go after the rot that destroys and determines everything in Washington. I believe we can have common sense gun reform. I think that the fact that the Parkland kids are marching every day, marching out of schools, the fact that I've met a mom who lost her 4-year-old on a park bench because of a stray bullet in Brooklyn, that's unacceptable. And I can take that story to any red or purple place in America and find common ground with any mother and say, Do you believe every mother in America should be able to take their child to a park anywhere in America and not be shot? And she's going to agree with me. And so I believe there is common ground because of the kids, because they're standing up to the NRA, because people are now willing to march. And I think it will change. But it takes all of us. I don't think it needs socialism. I think it just needs activism. I think we need people who are willing to rise up and demand it and campaign against the NRA and campaign against candidates that will not stand up to the NRA, like President Trump. And that's what it's going to take. The only time our government and our democracy ever works is when regular people stand up and demand it.
So on democratic socialism, one of AOC's top advisors has coined the phrase, behind every billionaire is a policy failure. I wanted to follow up on this question. You know, as you've moved further to the left on a host of issues, are you calling for abolishing billionaires in this country? I mean, is that extreme language, or does that reflect where you are?
No, but what his statement was saying is that if you've been able to accrue $1 billion in this economy, it means you're gaming the system in some respect. It means there's some gray area that you've taken extreme advantage of. It means that the industry that you're in perhaps has no oversight and no accountability and no regulation. It typically will mean something should be regulated that's not being regulated. When I was asked by the New York Times, does someone deserve to earn $1 billion? The answer is no. No one deserves $1 billion. Yes, you can work hard, you can accrue wealth, you can provide for your kids, you can provide for the next generation, but $1 billion is an outrageous, extraordinary amount of money. And so I'm sure he's trying to make a point about the lack of regulation and oversight and accountability, which is necessary. We've seen it. We've seen it with the examples you gave tonight. We've seen it with the drug companies. We've seen it with the NRA. We've seen it with social media companies. They're not regulated. They're taking advantage of antitrust laws. They're engaging in anti-competitive practices, and it's obvious. And so until we have regulators that will hold them accountable, you'll have this constant and chronic injustice. Just look at the opioid crisis. Look at what the Sackler family did. Look at what we saw from Purdue Pharmaceuticals documents. They made opioids more powerful and more addictive purposefully because they wanted to sell more drugs. They cared more about their profits than the patients they were supposed to be representing.
Thank you. I believe we have time for one or two more questions. Do we have Janos Martin in the audience? There he is. Janos, step to the mic.
Thank you. Senator Gillibrand, you have recently pledged to deliver criminal justice reforms. You talked about it in your speech a little bit tonight. And you've said that you will cut mass incarceration by 50%, which is the goal of the ACLU and other civil rights organizations. But other than your commitment to decriminalizing marijuana and working on bail reform, I would love to hear more specifics about how your administration would take steps to significantly reducing America's jail and prison population.
Thank you.
So the first two items that you mentioned, I think, are really important. The reason why we need to decriminalize marijuana is that, unfortunately, our criminal justice laws are disproportionately enforced against black and brown people in America. And there's no better example than how marijuana policy has been enforced. Again, if you are black in America, you are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana use, despite the same usage between white and black people. So that's a huge problem. So if you're going to decriminalize marijuana, I would expunge the records of anyone who's incarcerated because of a marijuana conviction. Second, I think cash bail is a huge issue. The fact that so many people cannot make bail are incarcerated, and they're incarcerated until their court date. And our criminal justice system just isn't set up to actually represent everyone well. We need to make sure we're actually investing in public defenders and our criminal justice system so people have a fair representation under the law. I wouldn't fund for-profit prisons. It's really disgraceful that we give public money to a for-profit prison system who has no incentive whatsoever to make sure that a prison population don't become recidivists, don't become reincarcerated. They have every incentive in the world to make sure that the prison population is reincarcerated. So I won't spend a dime on for-profit prisons. And I think that alone will create a better pathway for those who are incarcerated to get the kind of training they need so they can reemerge reemerge and actually get their voting rights back and have the skills and ability they need to get a good paying job as well as being able to provide for their families. It's that hopelessness, it's that inability to get a new job that results in recidivism. It's not that someone wants to commit a second crime. So I really think you need to invest in communities when they're coming out of prison so they can have the security and ability to reemerge and be a productive part of the population.
Thank you. Okay, last question. I wanted to give you a chance at a sort of closing arguments of sorts. Right now you're polling at less than 1% nationwide in a very crowded Democratic field. Do you actually have a path to win the nomination, Senator? And if so, what is it?
So the reason why I decided to run for president and the reason why I think I'm the best candidate to not only defeat President Trump, but to reunite this country and heal the wounds that he has created and festered is because I have a very different story than anyone else running for president. When I was first elected, I was elected in a 2-to-1 Republican district. I won that district twice, the second time with a 24-point margin. I've run for re-election as the senator from New York 3 times and have the highest vote threshold in the history of the state. Higher than Obama ever got, higher than Hillary, higher than Trump. In the last election in 2018, I won back 18 of the counties that had gone to President Trump. And I'm not just successful electorally, I'm successful legislatively. I actually pass laws. I bring people together. And I don't do it by compromising our values. I find Republicans who come to me and want to share my values. So when I repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell as a freshman senator, it wasn't because I didn't believe LGBTQ Americans should serve in our military. It's because I found 7 Republicans who shared that value and repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I had to hold Democrats accountable who said to me at the time, Kirsten, why are you doing this? It is so inconvenient. And I said to them, when is civil rights ever convenient? You have to do it because it's the right thing to do. So that's how I get things done. I find common ground with Democrats and Republicans to make a difference in people's lives. And I think you're going to need someone who takes on the fights that no one else will, who will take on the Pentagon, who will take on Congress, who will take on banks. Because if you're not willing to take on the special interests, good luck on passing your Green New Deal. Good luck on health care as a right. Good luck on taking on the NRA. And so I am willing to take on the fights that other people won't, and it's why I'm running for president. And when I go to Iowa and New Hampshire, the first question they ask is, can you beat Trump? The second question they ask is, can you beat Trump? And the third question they ask is, can you beat Trump? And the answer is yes. I can beat him in his backyard. I can go to Michigan and Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and win those states. Those states are no different economically and culturally than places in upstate New York and on Long Island. They have rural agriculture, they have rural manufacturing, they have small towns and small cities. And I understand those parts of this country because it's where I'm from. But I've never lost the ability to win the blue places, the red places, and the purple places at the same time. And the next person who defeats Trump and who's going to lead this country is going to have to be able to reunite this country and show what makes this country strong. It's our diversity. It's our care for one another. It's the notion that we treat others the way we want to be treated. That is what makes our country strong, and that's why I'm running for president, and that's why I'm going to win.
Thank you very much. Thank you
all.
Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you all for coming. And so if you like what you heard tonight, it's really important that you voice your views by going to KirstenGillibrand.com. Not everyone is guaranteed a spot on that September debate stage. And if you would like my voice to be among them, you need to go to KirstenGillibrand.com and support me with even $1. It's all that matters. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and thank you to all of you for the very thoughtful questions. We appreciate you being here, and best of luck, Senator.
Thank you.